Welcome to the Scouting Baseball Podcast with Taylor Blake Ward and Jeff Ellis of Scout Media Network. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm glad we got this thing up and running after a few technical difficulties.
Absolutely. You got to love technology. With technology, I found the song Intro by the XX, though, and that was our intro. Got to love that, right? Well, obviously, we're talking about baseball, and, Jeff, we usually tap into the talks of amateur baseball when it comes to the draft and things along those lines. We talk about professional baseball along the minor league lines, but right now we're talking about professional baseball as a business side. Jeff, obviously the collective bargaining agreement is coming into play. Today is November 30th, 2016, which means we are just a few hours away from what is supposed to be a new collective bargaining agreement for Major League Baseball, better well known as the CBA. A lot of things to touch on. Jeff, first of all, we are talking about the compensation for a qualifying offer. Can you fill us in a little bit on that, on what Ken Rosenthal of Fox Sports reported earlier today?
For those who are familiar, the qualifying offer teams can offer to free agents. Occasionally see contracts where that is they're not allowed to do that. And the reason is it's been pretty obvious the past few years that a qualifying offer for a certain level of player will drive down their offers. If you look at a Dexter Fowler a year ago, is the kind of a classic example. If you're a David Price, while he didn't have the qualifying offer, it doesn't matter for a player of that level. But for a lot of these other guys, we do see teams are afraid to sign a guy to a qualifying offer, and because if they do, they'll lose a draft pick. Now, the draft in and of itself, we kind of knew was going to change because the competitive balance picks, those are normally given out in July, and we were told they wouldn't be handed out till January, if at all. So Ken Rosenthal tweeted out today that they've been kind of looking at some alternatives to the idea of loss of draft pick. The main one he was tweeting out was that for a large market team, that instead of losing their pick altogether, for instance, I believe Baltimore would have picked 13th last year. And when they signed Gallardo, that cost them the 13th pick in the draft. Instead, maybe they fall to 18 or 23, were one of the ideas that were tossed around. But those were, that's what I saw it as. But there's a lot we can take and go from there with that idea and that proposal and what that can mean.
And obviously, these are reports from the sources of Rosenthal. He has great connections with the owners, with the Players Association. These are not our reports. These are his reports via his sources. And like Jeff was saying, instead of losing your top unprotected draft pick, you go, maybe lose 5 spots. I think it's a fantastic deal, and it could help with the negotiations moving forward. Personally, I think 5 spots isn't enough of a penalty. Maybe 10 spots, or maybe move a pick to the next round or a compensation pick at the end of the round. I'm not necessarily sure what the there's a lot of things that could be put in play, but obviously the report is moving 5 to 10 spots in the slot. Jeff, what would you do if you were a part of this negotiation and say a qualifying offer player to keep the penalty away from losing the pick, but maybe still allowing a penalty?
This would be my idea. Nothing that anyone I've ever heard bring up. My concern with a system like this, where we're keeping picks plus adding picks, is it's going to get back to the mess it was about 5 years ago when we saw the first round plus the supplemental round going 70, 80 picks. If the pick at the top of round 2 would be more what we consider a traditional third round selection. And, that was a system that was very different. But this is still a situation where we're looking at there's a chance that your average second-round pick is now going to be closer to, 60 instead of 30. So what I would actually recommend as a system is the team that loses the player gets the option to swap a pick with the team in front of it. Now, that might not make sense if you're thinking, well, what happens if we have the fifth pick in the draft and the Yankees sign a guy away from us and they have 15? Well, my idea then would be you would trade 35 for 15. So the Yankees would drop back to your second-round pick value, and you would essentially have 2 firsts, and you would lose that second-round pick. So this way we keep the same number of picks, so it doesn't get to that point where, teams who are in the second round for no reason of their own are now all of a sudden picking more third round. Keeps our picks in place. It gets rid of some of the confusion. And the team could get that choice of like, okay, well, this team is 1 spot ahead of us. We can flop our second for a first. So basically the idea is instead of altogether losing that pick, that any team that signs a guy swaps either their higher first round pick or a first round for a second round with team basically you choose. This way we don't get into that situation of 50 picks in the first round. I mean, we're still close. I think this year we had like 43 picks before the Phillies got that second overall pick. So my concern is that building up, because if you think about those picks that weren't taken out, then that Phillies second round pick would have been somewhere in the 60s, which makes it a third round selection.
I think that's a really interesting thought process. It's, you're basically talking about, in a sense, trading picks, but not necessarily you're trading premier players for picks, because these players that are given qualifying offers obviously are the top free agents moving forward. Personally, I do like the loss of a pick for signing someone like this. Maybe not to the extent of losing it entirely, especially for these teams that are picking in the teens or the 20s. But maybe moving to the end of the first round, maybe only having the compensation picks for, obviously we'll look at, I can't think of any qualified, say Justin Turner signs with the Red Sox. The Dodgers would get that compensation pick at the end of the first round, and the Red Sox would forfeit their first round pick. But the way I look at it is that this is just an example, but say the Red Sox do make that move, they would move to the end of the compensatory round into what would be just prior to the second round. So basically you're just moving to the end of the first round by signing one of these players, and also eliminating the competitive balance picks. That's just my opinion. Competitive balance is obviously something we need, so it's tough to kind of evaluate. And I think that the Owners and Players Association created a proper way in deciding that moving picks 5 back or 10 back, whatever it may be, is a very proper way to fixate this.
And then just to add on to that idea, something I don't think we talked about yet, is the idea that the teams that would fall back are kind of more big market teams. Maybe said mass market in the tweet. I should have it in front of me. But that said, if you're reading between the lines, that a small market team, let's say Tampa or the Cleveland, or I think San Diego still counts as, I'm trying to think who got competitive balance picks. And in competitive balance picks, there's a mix of 2 areas. But I assume what they would do is they would take just the smallest market squads, the Pittsburghs, the Clevelands, Tampa, and those teams would be exempt from the slide. So instead of getting, spent most of my career so far writing about the Indians, so I know them the best. But for instance, the Cleveland Indians had a bonus second this year that they spent on Logan Ice. Last year they got Tristan McKenzie, who's a rising prospect for them. The year before that was, I believe, Mike Pappy. They had 2 first rounders essentially in a second. So instead of those bonus picks that they've been getting, that maybe, and not everyone's taking advantage of those. And like I said, those competitive balance picks, where I believe a mix of smallest market and least revenue. So it was like the 5 smallest markets and the 5 smallest revenues. Sometimes those overlapped. So there wasn't always 10 teams, but I believe it was like for 7 picks, so not every team got it. That's also how the Cardinals somehow got competitive balance picks. But, maybe those 5 teams are then exempt from the slide. so they can go out and sign any free agent. They don't get that competitive balance pick anymore. But, if Dexter Fowler is sitting there in, March or so, that maybe one of those teams decided to sign him to an offer. The Indians did something similar when they signed Michael Bourne. They had their first round pick protected. That was the year they took Clint Frazier. They signed Nick Swisher, and at that point, they had a second round competitive balance pick, so Michael Bourne was just sitting around and they signed him. Now, neither of those signings worked out for them, but, it's maybe that idea of, for those teams, they don't have to worry about it. They can sign free agents because the big market teams know that, Tampa is never going to be getting that marquee free agent. Cleveland's never going to give a $200 million. Cleveland's going to give a $200 million contract maybe by the time I'm 80. No, these are just things that aren't going to happen, so that these guys can compete on the lower end.
Absolutely, and the reason we are bringing this up is because it is a key part of the CBA and the bargaining agreement. And what the issue is that we're in the midst of a potential lockout, and it's not that the lockout is a very serious thing, because it seems that negotiations are moving forward. It just took quite a while for things to move forward. Another big key on that is the international draft and the international market. So, Jeff, we spoke about this just a little bit before, but what is your take on the possibility of an international draft? It seems that, according to a few reports, that the international draft has been scraped from the negotiations table. But what would your take be on if this were something to happen?
For me, I'm surprised it's been scraped because, Major League Baseball Players Association cares about its members. The Major League Baseball Players Association is not draft-eligible kids. It's not Dominican kids. It's not even minor leaguers. They care about the guys in the majors. So often they've shown in the past zero care about such things, which is how we got the pool system to begin with, which was, we go back to 2011, which was probably the greatest draft I've seen as a writer. And that is everyone knew that was going to be the last year before the pool system. And teams spent like crazy because there weren't limits. There was the slotting system that was a recommended value. And this pool system went in very easily. So for me, it was surprising that this got such a big deal. I don't think it's the best thing, but I also think it's better than the current system where there's been a lot of problems with corruption. And I'm not just talking about kids falsifying ages. I mean, the people who are supposed to represent these kids, keeping money from them, getting bigger cuts. There's been problems. We even saw at one point the Washington Nationals, I won't name names, but you can go online, where their GM, not their current GM, but a former GM was accused of him and another. He wasn't directly accused. The GM, I should say, was not directly accused of improprieties and basically getting signing bonus money from the kids that they signed. But I believe there was a person in their organization who was, allegedly, I'll just say. So there's been a lot of problems with corruption. A lot of kids flying under the radar. You also do here, if you talk to people, and I don't talk to a ton of people there, this isn't my strength, but when there is the Major League Baseball draft, a guy might be hidden, and if he's hidden, word gets out. It's really hard to just sit on a guy, because once someone hears a scout's going to see someone, other people hear and go. I hear more examples of the international where a guy is just completely tucked away and signs for something minuscule, and it's a lot easier to hide a guy in these areas. And when you get right down to it, I mean, these are traditionally a lot poorer areas, and these kids, I know they don't want it. They've had sit-ins and everything else, but something needs to be done because I think it's a broken system. And we saw a situation with the Red Sox and their guys becoming invalidated, and that's the second time the Red Sox have had corruption issues there, because Carlos Martinez was originally a Red Sox before issues arised, and he was granted free agency and signed with the Cardinals. It's a lot of poor kids and poor families, And I would just like to see some proper oversight. I think the system is not the best for these kids. And while they think it is, there are guys getting huge money, especially with as young as they're signing. There's just so many negative avenues. You put in the draft, you do the pool system. I think and you give it a pool equal to what the current United States draft is. I think it could be really well done. They need to do something.
See, personally, I just don't. I don't understand the international process as well as many do, and that's not something I'm happy to say that I don't. I've tried studying it. It's just very challenging. But I have spoken to international players who have spoken about this, and they speak about how when they sign, when they were 16, 17 years old, that they gave up, what would have been a career elsewhere and did decide that they would become professional baseball players. And, if they signed for $150,000, that's a very large scale set of money for their family. And they're using this as a career for their family. They're not necessarily using it as a path to the majors. A lot of these guys know that, they're given a chance to make it in the major league level, but many don't, and they understand that, they comprehend that. So for the guys that sign for these, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even the smallest minuscule amount of maybe $20,000, that can really provide a lot for their family. But they're also, for a lot of these Cuban guys, they don't get to see their family. A lot of these other guys don't get to see a lot of items, Dominicans and Venezuelans, depending on where they are in the country and things. And what is really tough to me is when you're talking about the draft, you're talking about money being lost from these guys because you don't know what the signing bonus rules will be for that, what anything like that could come down to. So if it's similar to the amateur draft at the major league level with the American players or, Canadian players, things along those lines that are going to school and are eligible for the Major League Baseball draft, there's a lot of limitations to that. And a guy that signs for, I don't know the exact number, but this last draft, you can only imagine there may have been 50 guys that signed for $1 million or so. And outside of that, you start going and these guys are signing for a couple $100,000, a couple this and that, which is a fine amount of money, especially for someone at the international level. But you get down to guys that were signing for $10,000 or less. And we don't know how far this international draft would go. We don't know how much money is involved in the signing process. And it could be a very big hit to the personal player, the player themselves. And I think that part of the Players Association is looking at it as things like this. I've spoken to one international player, and he brought out that this really would impact the family and the compensation made for the player. So we don't know. I personally don't know, Jeff. I don't know if you do, but the amount of money that's taken, and obviously money is a key part of every negotiation, but it's challenging to see, and that's why I think I disagree with the international draft. At first, I thought it was a great idea. I think that it can become a good idea for competitive balance, but at the same time, if it's taking that much of a hit on the person themselves, it really is a problem. Jeff, do you have any opinions on how this could be fixed? Because as I'm being told now, from what I've heard as well from my sources as well as others, the international draft is completely off the table.
Well, I think sorry, I had a bit of a reverb there. What I would like to see, because right now what we're seeing in terms of international spending is a huge amount of it is not going to the players. We're seeing these teams basically spend huge 1 year, take the next year off, and spend a ton in fines. So just make a larger, for me, the idea is increase the size of the pool. And if you're going to do the draft or whatever they're going to do, to just find a way to instead of these guys signing for 10,000 or something, that see that level rise up where it's more like the 100,000 guys get after the 11th round for a lot of guys. My issue right now is the international market has become a way for certain owners just basically to gain enrichment through the heavy fines that certain teams pay.
And I agree with that. I think you noted something that's been brought up, and that's making the bonus pool much larger. And that was something I believe at first was a recommendation from Ben Badler of Baseball America. I read an article that he wrote not that long ago on fixing the international market, or at least helping to fix it. And that seemed to be the big tool that could help out. Jeff, we're gonna kind of move forward a little bit here. Just the reason we've brought out a few times, but the reason we are talking about this is the sake of a potential lockout for baseball due to the CBA negotiations not being right. They're still going on, and it's near 7:30 East Coast time. So I believe that's we're 5.5 hours away from finding out if we will be in the midst of a lockout or if baseball will extend the current CBA or what will happen. It doesn't seem that it's going to be bad, but Jeff, if I can take this one a little bit, I do believe that if it's not negotiated by midnight, that a lockout would be a very good thing as long as it's not long term. Because if you can't fix something and you need time to do it, take the time to do it. And maybe we're in a lockout for a week, maybe 2 weeks, but it's much better fixing the problem fully than rushing to not fix the problem and have it done by midnight tonight. And I don't know your opinion on that, Jeff, but just my take on that.
We just all want to see it done. I apologize. I'm getting a bit of reverb again. As long as we can get something to the table and everyone can, everyone's unhappy, it's the best agreement, because then it means it's equal. But there's a lot to figure out. Time will be taken. I don't think it's going to extend for too long, just because you get down to it. This is probably the most profitable, successful postseason they've ever had, and they would be foolish to not take that momentum and run with it.
Absolutely. And, like we said, neither of us seem to think it's going to take a long time. I don't believe any in the industry do believe it will take a long time to get this right, but it does need to be done, and it does need to be right by the end of it. We hope that you have been paying attention. Obviously, the main talk of what we were going to talk about today is the competitive balance the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement. See, this is what happens when we talk the draft, competitive balance, right? We're going to move on. We do post, if you have any questions, obviously ask Jeff or myself on Twitter. My handle at Taylor Blake Ward. Jeff's handle at Jeff MLB Draft. Jeff, you are our key draft expert. I like to call myself a draft expert, but I like to go to you for these things. And we have a question from Doc Herbert, who I just clicked on his handle, and he has an outstanding spreadsheet of last year's draft based on 18 expert mock drafts. That includes us, MLB Pipeline, Keith Law, Baseball America, the works. His question, Jeff, and I'll let you answer it first. And do you see anybody shooting up draft boards between now and June, and anybody's stock who will fall a lot? Jeff, we're very far away from the draft, but is there anyone that you see as a potential riser and a potential faller?
I've been a fan of Jake Berger for a while. I want to say, this is bad because I'm going to misstate his college. He's a third baseman at Missouri State, I want to say.
Yes.
Because in my head, he's at Mississippi State. No, he's at Missouri State. He's at the smaller one. But yeah, I liked what his numbers looked like last year. Kind of a little under the radar, name coming up hardly at all, which means either this is going to be an Andrew Benintendi situation where I'm ahead of the curve, or this could be a Heath Quinn situation where I am just evaluating someone completely differently than other people. I think if he comes up, I mean, you look at the numbers last year and 21 home runs and to only 35 strikeouts. In a conference that, yeah, small. It's a small conference, but there are some teams out there in that Missouri Valley Conference. So he's a name I think could hit himself onto the radar. A guy I get asked a lot, and I think could be a faller, is Alex Sheriff, the prep pitcher from Texas. I know in most places he's considered the top Texas arm. My concern there is more and more we see the importance of age with these guys, and I believe Sheriff will turn 19 in January or February of this year. Which after we saw Blake Rutherford fall to the middle of the first round with concerns when he turned 19 in May, I just think Sheriff turning 19 as early as he does is going to cause. I mean, I know there are teams that are going to pretty much take him off the board because of that. Is that fair? No, but there are teams that really place such a premium on age. I can't see them considering him to sign him away from, I believe, Texas A&M is. So I think he could go out and pitch really well, and there's still going to be teams that are just going to be off. That's nothing against him. That's nothing against his talent. But if you want to look for a guy who I think I can safely say will take a ding in value, it's going to be Alex.
And thank you very much, Jeff. Obviously, I'm very high on Scherf, and you have told me all about Berger. I did like him, but now I really like him because of things that you've said. So
and I apologize for messing up Scherf's last name there. I just realized I said it wrong half a dozen times. Pronunciation, never my strength. If I mess up someone's name, please tell me. I will fix it and go from there. But again, I want to apologize for that mess up to the player, especially when I feel bad enough where it's in a possible negative connotation.
You're just such a jerk, Jeff.
All the time.
Well, obviously for me, I will know some guys myself. There was one guy that came to my mind when I was reading this question, and it was Drew Rasmussen of Oregon State. Young guy has kind of dealt with a lot, but just pure power stuff in a pretty premier conference. I really do like him. I think that in a draft that does see a lot of college arms, there's going to be a couple guys that fall and a couple guys that rise. He is one of those guys that is on my rising chart. Royce Lewis, a shortstop out of Junipero Serra in Southern California, another guy that scouts just seem to rave about every time they see him.
He's got a lot of heat. I feel like everyone's kind of re-ranking right now. Sorry to interrupt. But he's one of those guys that is they jump 10 or 15 spots on a lot of rankings.
It's very true. It's interesting. Before this, probably near the end of last year's draft and kind of going into the postseason, I had Royce Lewis about 20th on my ranking, roughly in that region. And right now, I'd have him right near the 10 mark. I mean, I've already jumped him 10 in my personal notes. So for me, it's Drew Rasmussen of Oregon State, a right-handed pitcher, and a starting pitcher, and shortstop Royce Lewis of Southern California.
Drew's a lefty.
Yeah, that's why I was slipping up there. And so for guys that are going to be kind of falling, you just look at the high risk, high reward guys, because one of those guys is going to be great and one of those guys is going to fall. We saw it with Alec Hansen last year, who, he hit the professional levels and it seemed he was a different guy. Same thing happened with another Oklahoma arm just a few years back with Garrett Richards. You can see what he's doing now. I'm going to go with the guy that a lot of people like right now, and a lot of people are very high on. I like his stuff a lot. His name is DL Hall. He's a lefty starting pitcher out of, I believe, a Florida high school. I don't have the notes in front of me, but
It's Florida. I have to look it up as well.
Yeah. Florida. And so DL Hall is a fantastic pitcher. His stuff is great. My concern is that he has trouble finding the strike zone even at the high school level. So very raw arm. It's nothing against him because I like him.
From Valdosta.
Valdosta, thank you. And I think he has potential to be a top 15 pick. But if he just can't throw strikes in front of scouts, you're really relying on the raw stuff. Another guy that is very similar is Tanner Houck. Throws hard. He's still some work to be done with control and command. He's out of Missouri, starting pitcher. Just guys like that, like you noted, guys that are turning 19 before the draft. One of those guys, I believe, is Brady McConnell, who we both are incredibly high on. I like Brady. I think he is fantastic, but just another guy that age could be a concerning factor. It shouldn't be. It should never be, but just could be for certain teams. So I'll use those guys as my three. And you can take it or leave it, and I hope you take it.
No, yeah, I'm just kind of looking at my list right now. There's so many guys who I think have the potential to jump. South Carolina, I can't speak about enough just because that staff's going to be a lot of fun. Between Schmidt, a healthy Will Crow, and then it's
Ty Johnson.
I was saying T. Johnson, and I go, it's not Travis Johnson.
It's Tyler.
Tyler Johnson. The numbers he put up, seeing him start, it's, I think if McKay from Louisville comes out and has another kind of shutdown year, I don't know what his ceiling is, but it's just he's going to be such a safe pick. And then a name, I don't think we've really talked about hardly at all, but has a lot of potential is KJ Harrison from Oregon State. We go back to, and I got to stop saying every 10th word. Something I realized when I started doing radio broadcasts. But Harrison, after his freshman year, was talked about as a potential top 5 pick. Catcher, first base, DH. We have to find a position. But if he comes back and he hits, and I don't know what the plan is for him right now, but if he can go and look like an average catcher and hit like he did as a freshman, all of a sudden he's a guy who's going to go from top of the late first round to top 10 to top 5. So it's just another guy to kind of keep on the radar. And J.J. Schwartz, if he goes back and does what he did again as a freshman, those are the guys who I think in some respects can have our biggest jump. As a guy who had a good freshman year, a weak sophomore.
And I'm going to just add just a little bit more. Another guy that has a, two name initial. First name is MJ Melendez, the catcher. And he's a guy that could rise drastically. Fantastic skill set behind the plate. Still has a lot of work to do at the plate, but has improved. And just a few names to kind of keep tabs on. I know, Jeff, you're incredibly high on MJ Melendez. I'm starting to really get into him more.
So tools, just, the defensive tools are in place. Great bat speed. His dad is a college coach. There's a lot to like there. It's, nothing is riskier than a prep catcher. That is the riskiest thing you can draft. But the tools and everything are in place there. You could have something very special down the line.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I think, man, it's fun to talk draft. It's so far away.
It's February. We're, it's basically December now, so we're 2 months out from getting to see some college baseball started. So it's right around the corner.
Hey, and January doesn't even really count as a month, so it's just really a month. And, Jeff, one more thing that we were going to talk about just real quick before we close out is Andrew McCutchen. It seems the Pirates organization is ready to part ways with him. He had a very down year last year. Still had a 104 OPS plus, something that I kind of noted that was interesting, that he was still league average at a very bad year. Jeff, what do you think it would take for an organization to not only attain McCutchen, but who would get the benefit of getting him?
Well, just to do the 30-second backstory, that'll actually be about a minute and a half. For those who don't know the Pirates, Sterling Marte and Gregor Polanco are both all-star caliber talents, and they could probably both handle center. Polanco for sure can handle center. And Marte is a pretty strong defender in left. I think he could be an average to slightly below average center fielder. So they've got these two great players. Austin Meadows spent a good chunk of the year in AAA. He was the high school player taken after Clint Frazier in that draft, and there were two Georgia kids who came up together. Meadows was bigger, very different personality types, but both are excellent prospects. So they got Meadows sitting in AAA ready to go, and they've got these two stars. So you got McCutchen, who makes the most money, is going to be a free agent. I believe in 2 years. I think whatever team gets him would have him for 2 years. I don't believe this is just a rental. And you look at the numbers, his defense has gotten worse every year, and that's also a big component of the trade. He was atrocious in center field last year. So can you trust him out there? But you're looking at a guy, he was hurt. Maybe he can get some stuff back, and that's the question you have to say. Was he hurt and he played below his ability? Or was this the beginning of a decline, because his numbers have shown a steady decline? This year was a huge drop. The cost to get him, is rumored to be 2 upper-tier prospects and then some secondary pieces. It's going to be a hard fit to take on the salary, give up, something similar to what the Indians essentially gave up for Andrew Miller, to get a guy that you don't know. You have no idea exactly how it's going to work. No one out there is sure. If the Pirates were sure he was going to be an all-star, they'd just play it out with him and maybe have Meadows get some time at first base. They'd find another way to work. The fact that there's even talk means that nobody knows, and that's kind of the situation we're at. I think they have a lot of needs. Pitching is there. There's a lot of ways they can go, but I saw one rumor or somewhere, and it was from someone reputable, saying the cost from the Nationals would be like Giolito and another piece. It wasn't Turner, but it was still like an upper tier guy. So I'll be curious to see what comes of it. But it's just so hard. This isn't a guy we know is a slam dunk, which makes it even more difficult.
What's just really intriguing to me is, obviously last year was his worst year possibly of his career. And it's just so weird because the last 4 years he finished in the top 5 in MVP voting. He was MVP one of those years. There was a period of time where I believe that Andrew McCutchen was the best player in baseball, even over Mike Trout in 2013. I thought McCutchen was fantastic. But obviously there's a lot of fear of how much the injury actually plagued him last year and how much he's actually really faltering. And if it's really going to cost me my top 2 prospects in the organization, for an organization that has reputable farm system, I just don't know if you can take on that risk. A lot of people are saying the Blue Jays are a fit, or the Dodgers can make a splash, the Nationals can make a splash. I am very open about my opinions of Andrew McCutchen. I think he's great for the clubhouse. I think there was a period of time where he was absolutely the best player in baseball, but you cannot risk losing 2 top guys that can really impact your future for one guy that could possibly have a large-scale impact on your future. McCutchen is a free agent beginning at the end of next year, so this is a 1-year rental. So it's really tough for me to see giving up. I've always believed in trades is, if it's a 1-for-1 guy or 1-for-1, it's a good deal. If you're getting away and giving away 2 guys that have a major impact on your team or something along those lines, it's just really tough to make a trade. Austin Meadows is fantastic, but I believe that you have to keep Andrew McCutchen if whoever gets him is really taking that high risk. So I do believe the Pirates will win if they trade Andrew McCutchen.
I agree. It's just, especially since I had that wrong, where it's a 1-year rental. There's so much risk there. I write about the Indians. It's a team I know. The talk is, and the Indians have a gaping hole in center field, so the talk has been, constant from the start. But if an Indians team that's already shelled out quite a few prospects, it's hard to figure out a deal that makes sense. And I think if I ran a team, I don't know if I would be able to make that call to McCutchen is a great player. He's a fantastic ambassador for the game. I hope he rebounds. I hope he turns back to the same guy he was, no matter where he is, because he's just one of the really good guy by all accounts. But it's just such a risk. I don't know.
Exactly. And one thing's for sure, Andrew McCutchen is fantastic for baseball. He's a great guy. He's a great role model. But, the risk is too high. And if I'm GM, same as you, Jeff, I'm not even making calls, So, well, Jeff, we've come to the end of our podcast here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Jeff, do you have any plugs, anything you'd like to say as we work our way out?
I'm kind of doing a bunch of draft stuff. I'm going to have I just finished up my look at the Twins. Next up is the Reds. I'm just going in draft order, looking at tendencies in their last draft class. I have something up just looking at the recent history of the Rule 5 piece. I've been doing something on that for the last 8 years, every year. I will be interested to see what happens with the Rule 5 if we have a bit of a lockout. That's going to be something to consider. But, just keep turning into Scouting Baseball. Thanks to everyone who's stopping by and reading. It's my first time as a publisher, so it's still a work in progress. I'm trying to get it there, but thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. On the Scouting Baseball website, we will have quite a few items, working on some redraft articles. Not sure which one, so if you want to send us a recommendation, feel free to do so. I will be working on some. I'm sure you'll be working on some. We're working on some prospect countdowns. A lot of people across the Scout Network are working on a few. I saw that, obviously, Cardinal Nation will be working on their 40 days, 40 nights, 40 Cardinals prospects. Angels website will be working on their top 51 prospects. There's quite a bit to come on Scouting Baseball and the Scout Network. Feel free to subscribe. We'll have that on the link as well. And Jeff, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Hopefully we don't have to deal with a lockout for too long. And for the Scout Network and Scout Media, my name is Taylor Blake Ward. If you want to follow us on Twitter, handles are at JeffMLBDraft. Mine is at Taylor Blake Ward, all one word. Follow Scout Media on Twitter at Scout Media, and we will talk to you very soon. Have a wonderful week and avoid the lockout.